This is like both, oh, I got my glasses. This is both thrilling and frustrating because I want to reach through the computer and grab everybody. And I think that we have South Africa on. Erin, who else is on? You know?
South African, and I think Australia was invited too. So
lovely. Okay, so I'm just going to begin because we only have 45 minutes and let's maximize every second of it. I wanted to begin by saying that while this is obviously a pale imitation of being together, if we get our heads around it in the right way, this can feel so much like what we experienced, because really what was connecting us, although the land of Israel certainly allows for a deeper connectivity between souls, there is something about our attitude, our openness, our desire going in to these classes that we took, these moments that we had together, that we created. We created it by our open-heartedness. And so let's do what we can. It would be tremendous for me if you would use the chat function. If you look on your screen, I think you'll find a little button that says chat. And on the right-hand side of this application, you'll see that you are able to say hello, you're able to ask a question, you're able to have a difference of opinion, so that it can be to a certain extent interactive, although not voice to voice. We can still have our voices, so to speak, heard. So please, if you're on right now, it'd be tremendous for me if somebody, just anybody, could type in on the chat segment, we're here, we're listening, whatever you want to put, okay? Oh, that's tremendous. Hi, Ronit. Okay, so that's one thing. The second piece of it is I wanted to remind you that on the final day of our trip, we talked a lot about the concept of bringing it all home. I don't know if you follow my Ask Me Anything columns. I hope you do. But just last week, someone wrote in talking about the sense of estrangement she felt in her own life, having had this mind-blowing experience and coming home and feeling, she said, I feel like an outsider looking in. And then she said, but actually I feel like an insider looking out, which I thought was a very profound statement. And she wanted to know how to get her family up to speed. And if you read my response, basically what I said is that the work coming home from these trips is not your family's work, it's yours. It's understanding that when we have a paradigm shift, as we discussed on the first night, when we have a breakthrough, a soul awakening, when we have a consciousness raising, if you will, we see the world very differently, because if you recall, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, and so does everybody else for that matter. So the primary technique of making a difference in your life is not going to be what you say or do or ask of the other people. Rather, it's going to be becoming the change you wish to see, which means you spend the majority of your time working on your inner world, your own character, your ability to withhold judgment except for favorable judgment, your ability to look at people with an ayin tov, a good eye, your ability to lengthen the space, if you recall, between stimulus and response, so that you can make conscious decisions about how you wish to interact in the world. All of these things add up after a period of time to people noticing that you yourself have a level of serenity that you didn't have prior. And that is what we say is by attraction rather than promotion, where people want very badly to be or have a piece of your action, if you will, a piece of your serenity. And then they come to you and they say, what has changed in you? Why is it you're not angry all the time? Why is it that you can sustain your mood longer? Why is it that, you look at the world in a new way? And at that point, you can discuss those principles. But prior to it, all it really feels is as though you're trying to impose your reality on someone else. And that is never successful. So the very first thing that's going to happen today in terms of follow-up in a really logistical and concrete way is that the English speakers among you, now the Spanish speakers will receive next week, but the English speakers among you are going to receive a survey that I beg you to fill in. And it's going to deal with these issues, these coming home issues, these re-entry issues, which I've had so many emails about from people who are really trying to figure out how to actualize those dreams and aspirations they had during the week, especially on those last days. How am I going to impact my relationships in my inner world? How am I going to grow those relationships to a point where they feel even vaguely like what we felt on the trip. And also, how am I going to take action in my community? Because a sensation of feeling without action, if you recall, we talked about SMART goals, things that are tangible, things that are simple and attainable and recordable, where you can take a look and see if you're actually following through. The way one would, for example, with the diet, when they step on the scale, you need to have goals that you can actually measure, because we set ourselves up to be successful. If we make these lofty ideas, these lofty resolutions, we often fail. And this is why, in the answer to that woman, I said there is a reason why every year in the December holiday period, there are scores of advertisements for health clubs. Everybody's going to get into shape. They're going to lose that weight. They're going to tighten those abs. And they all buy memberships or gift memberships to health clubs as gifts. But the health clubs never build new lockers, because they understand that what happens is the best laid plans of mice and men go awry. That we have these wonderful inspirational ideas, but we don't follow them through. And to me, there's nothing sadder than that energy being left to dissipate into nothingness. And so I ask you today to not just to fill in the survey for us, but to fill it in for you, so that you hold yourself accountable for where you've been and where you're going, and how you're going to take leadership in your home, in your community, and how you're going to help actualize and realize the dream of the JWRP, which is to inspire a woman so that she can inspire her family, and in doing so inspire her community and ultimately the entire world. So please, as soon as it comes through in your inboxes today, I ask you to fill it out. We read every single comment. We look at everything. As a matter of fact, just last week, I received all of the reviews of the trips, and I went through every comment. Some of them are painful, for me to listen to, because it's never 100%, but they're worthwhile. They help me improve, they help the trip improve, and they will help you ultimately reach your goals, which is the greatest method to self-esteem, is to see yourself moving forward, even if it's by inches. Self-esteem is not built by doing someone else's homework, so to speak. It's done by achieving your goals small, incrementally, and honestly. That's where self-esteem comes from. And self-esteem, as we know, is at the root of a happy life. It enables us to feel humility. If we know that there's an inverse relationship between arrogance and humility, if we understand that the more self-esteem we have, the more we will be able to afford humility, and the less need for arrogance or rationalizations we'll have. So I'm asking you to please fill in those surveys. The reason I wanted to do today, to begin with the notion of forgiveness, is because I believe that as we move into the holiday season, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, just before that, we enter the month of Elul. Elul, well, it's an acronym for I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. What it also means is that it's the time of year where we do that searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, where we take a good long look at our role in issues that go on in our lives. Not to say that there are not others who play a role in the way you feel and the way you behave. There obviously are, and there are things that are problematic. But the first thing that a Jew does is to look inward. That work allows us to reframe our reality and to start making an impact on our own lives and the lives of others. I started with forgiveness because forgiveness is a fundamental quality that one requires if they are not to be clogged up, mentally constipated with old, ugly, fiery thoughts that stand in the way of our own progress. In fact, there is a statement which I'm sure some of you have heard, and it goes like this: refusing to grant forgiveness or holding a grudge is akin to eating poison and expecting the other person to die. Holding a grudge is the spiritual equivalent of eating poison and expecting the other person to die. It means that when we hold a grudge, when we stay angry, when we hold on to the fiery energy of rage, we color our own worlds. Now, I know that at this point, most people begin to say to themselves, yeah, well, that's true in most cases, but in her case, in his case, in that case, do I have to forgive Hitler? It all ultimately goes, do I have to forgive Hitler? Let's leave Hitler and Saddam Hussein and all of those dudes out for the moment. And then let's look at the day-to-day purposes of wanting and needing and requiring, not just for others, but for ourselves, the notion of forgiveness. So there's a beautiful quote from Marlene Dietrich, one of my favorite actresses of the 40s, speaking of Hitler, who said, once a woman forgives a man his sins, she must not reheat them for breakfast. It's a funny comment. But the idea of forgiveness means that it doesn't necessarily say that we never forget, because forgetfulness or forgetting in general is not identical to forgiveness, nor is clarity. Many of us will say, well, if I understood why it happened, then I could forgive. And so we spend our lives trying to have clarity on why a thing happens. We say, I can't accept this till I understand that. And that is part of the normal psychological condition. However, it's not the Jewish mindset. Why is that? Well, because, as a great rabbi once said, when we understand that we will never understand everything there is to understand, then we understand. So let's take a look for a minute at the levels of forgiveness, forgiveness for oneself and forgiveness for others. I'd like to reiterate first, though, the idea that clarity is not identical with forgiveness. What does that mean? Well, let's say someone has treated you very badly, and you find out, God forbid, later that day that perhaps they had just received a terrible diagnosis, or something horrible had just happened in their life, or God forbid, they were suffering from a frontal lobe tumor that made it impossible for them to hold their tongue. And then magically, all of the rage that colored our reaction to what they said or did magically moves away. Why does it move away? Because now we understand. But forgiveness is a different thing. Forgiveness is almost always given when a situation could rightfully be called unforgivable. It's a personal unburdening. It's a desire to remove a grudge that sits snarling like a gargoyle on your heart, that colors not the way the world sees you, but also the way you see the world. So the late Lubavitcher Rebbe often said that there are 3 levels of forgiveness. And the Talmud says that in order to not be considered cruel, one must at least attain the first level of forgiveness. And it goes like this. The first level of forgiveness is that you might still be upset, you might still be in pain, you might have no desire to renew the relationship as it was, but at the very least, you can get yourself to a place where you don't wish ill for the person. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I never wish ill for anyone, but we do. We do. I remember when my best girlfriend got divorced from her husband. I was so angry at him, so hurt for her, that any time he would go out on a date post, I used to think to myself, and sometimes out loud to her, oh, this doesn't work out. I want you to be remarried before him. I hope he's not happy. I hope he spends the rest of his life alone since he threw away something so great as you. This is a minor degree of not wishing someone well. A second way would be driving along in the car and someone speeding, moving through and making you feel threatened on the highway. The little voice inside of you says oh, they're going to have an accident. God forbid. It is normal to have these kind of punitive thoughts. I remember once going to my psychiatrist when I was 19 years old. Yes, I had a psychiatrist even at 19. Because I had this reoccurring fantasy of my ex-boyfriend driving off a cliff. And as he was about to crash, he would scream my name and have complete clarity that I was the love of his life and how could he have left me. And I felt like a ghoul. And I said this to the shrink, crying, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? And he said, if I had 10 cents for every woman who came in with the death fantasy for their ex, I would never have to work again. I also have a girlfriend who used to go to expensive department stores and try on Hermes scarves around her head, wrapping them in the mirror. And one day, the sales clerk said to her, "What's that for? What are you buying this for?" And she said, "It's for my husband's funeral." Well, her husband was quite alive and well. So these feelings, while they're not anything to be proud of, are normal. The trick to allowing a person's self to grow is to recognize that some of the things that pass through our brains, while ugly, are not surprising. Often it is the shame and the embarrassment we feel about those punitive thoughts that prevent us from getting over them, because we have to build a huge case around why they're acceptable to feel. So the first step in forgiveness is to not necessarily let go of the anger, not necessarily rebuild the relationship, not necessarily forgive, not entirely, but to get to a place where you can at least wish the person they should be well. The quote that I usually use, I may have mentioned this on the trip, comes from Fiddler on the Roof. There's a famous scene when it's during the pogroms and a bunch of peasants go to the Rebbe and they say, Rebbe, there's a blessing for everything. Is there a blessing for the evil czar? And the Rebbe says, of course there is. May God bless and keep the czar far away from us. And that is enough. It is often enough to get to a level where you can say, that person, that situation hurt me so deeply. It is so toxic for me. I have no ability, no desire to re-enter a relationship with that person. In fact, I can't get rid of the pain in my heart. But they should be well and just be away from me. And you know, most people think that that's an easy step, but often it is the hardest first step of all. The second step in forgiveness is to be able to say to a person, to oneself, I am starting to diminish the feelings of rage. They're not completely gone. I'm guarded still, but I can be polite when I see you. I don't have to cross the street and run when you come in the room. I don't have to fantasize about negative things. I'm no longer in agony about this. In fact, the rage has dissipated. And that's level 2 of forgiveness, and it's a very high level to get to. The third level, of course, and the highest level of all, is to be able to say, I am done with the rage that colored these feelings. I can let them go, and I am prepared to re-enter into a relationship with this person. It may not look exactly the same as it used to. I might have greater boundaries around it than I once did, but I am prepared to re-enter into a relationship with this person. So you might say, is that always necessary? And that brings me to the second piece. The holiday of Yom Kippur, which is coming up quickly, ladies, is a time where all sins, all mistakes, all missing of the mark between ourselves and God can be forgiven by God. But know this, that the things that we have done between man and man, human to human, cannot be forgiven by God. God himself recuses himself of that responsibility. In order to achieve forgiveness, it must be given and or received. So what does that look like? There's a very, very famous story written by, senior moment. It's called The Sunflower. And it was written by Simon Wiesenthal. And he tells this story post the war about how he was called upon to give forgiveness to a Nazi soldier who was lying on the ground about to breathe his last breath. Another German brought Simon Wiesenthal over to represent all Jews. Apparently what had happened was that there was a burning fire in the Warsaw Ghetto, and a man and his wife and his baby had stood at the window. And when it became clear that the only thing they could do was jump, and jump they did, this Nazi officer picked up his gun and shot at them as they were coming down. disgusting and reprehensible behavior. But here's the rub. He was clearly a religious man of some sort, terrified of dying, having done that thing. They called over this young boy, Simon Wiesenthal, and asked him to offer this soldier forgiveness for the entire Jewish people so that he might die feeling at least clear. And Simon Wiesenthal famously stood silent. Not a word passed his lips. Post the war, he wrote a story about this, and it became part of this think tank, if you will. And they put together people of all the world's religions to ask them, what might you have done in that situation? Well, almost uniformly, all the Christians said yes, we would have given him and granted him forgiveness. Almost uniformly, all of the Jews said no way. And everything else was split on a sort of 50-50 split through the other world religions. Except they were all missing the point. Because in Judaism, we understand that God cannot grant forgiveness for that which happens between man and man. Only we can. Only we can. Do you realize the power that you hold within your soul? That you are able to grant something that God himself is not able to grant, that God recused himself from, as it were, in order to take his precious children, the beings that are we, to teach them what it means to model forgiveness. So no, Simon Wiesenthal could not have offered forgiveness to that guard. That could only have happened through the people who he affected. The answer to that question for Simon Wiesenthal was, I simply was not able to. Which brings me to the next point. Many of us, when we discuss forgiveness, focus immediately on who we need to forgive, whether we should, what the cost might be, and rarely those who need to forgive us. Because oftentimes we have no clue who is holding anger towards us, who has hurt us, who has felt hurt by us. And so for me, once I learned this Jewish principle, that is, there is an idea that every time you judge negatively, every time you refuse forgiveness, even on the first level, it is as though your soul is whipped up to the heavenly court where it is judged with the same forensic accuracy as you judged another. So the question becomes, can I afford to be judged with the same exactitude as the person I am judging? If you remember, on the first night, we talked about the idea that we meet people in chapter 3. We don't know what happened before, and we don't know what's going to happen after. And we also know, as we said at the beginning of this, that clarity is not identical to forgiveness. So I'd like to read you something which I find fascinating. You should have it on your handout, but I will read it to you. There's a Greek word called sugnomi, which is usually translated as forgiveness, but it really means exculpation or absolution. It's not that I forgive you for what you did, it's that I understand what you did. You couldn't really help it. You were caught up in circumstances outside of your control, or alternatively, I don't need to take revenge because you've now shown your deference to me, that you hold me in proper regard. My dignity has been restored. Franz de Waal, who is a primatologist, talked about the notion of peacekeeping measures between the great apes and the bonobos, which are closest related to us physiologically. The idea being that peacekeeping measures occur even, excuse me, in the animal kingdom. That even the great apes, the bonobos, are able to appease, to acquiesce, in order to keep peace within their group order. And we do that too. But that is not forgiveness. Peace at any price is not the same as saying, what that person did felt unforgivable to me. It hurt me deeply. And now I have to decide whether I hold on to it or not. So sociologists who study the art of forgiveness, and Rabbi Sir Jonathan Sacks, one of my favorite rabbinical writers, says that the first example of real forgiveness recorded anywhere is the story of Joseph and his brothers. So those of you who saw Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, I'm sure will remember that Joseph was thrown into a pit, his cloak dipped in animal blood, and he was sold as a slave to passing Egyptian merchants. His father was told that his son was killed, his most favorite son, and for 20 years or more, everyone believed he was dead. Well, as the story goes, as you may remember biblically or from Broadway, when the time comes that Joseph reveals himself to his brothers in Egypt, where is he going to be able to get them help for the famine that's happening in their land? Because he completely controls the food supply now in Egypt, where he went from zero to hero almost overnight in Egypt and became the viceroy. When he finally reveals himself to his brothers, he famously says, and I will read it, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives with a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." Whoa. Now you can imagine how these brothers must have felt. They did the unforgivable thing. They ripped apart a family. They left their poor father to believe that his child was dead. They did all of the things that they did. How was it that Joseph was able to not just offer them forgiveness, but tell them that they had no responsibility in it? Now, none of us are going to get to the level of Joseph. If we are, I'd like to meet you and have tea with you. But the meta message here for me, and I think something that gave me the ability and the strength in order to achieve forgiveness for people where it felt unforgivable, was Joseph's overarching view, which was that whatever happens to us in life has been directed from above. Now, this doesn't work for me in all cases. I don't want to be told, yes, well, this disease, this bankruptcy, this, that, it was for you from God. Whether it's true or not, doesn't provide me any comfort. It doesn't tell me how to move forward, and it doesn't stop the pain. But here's the thing about pain. Pain can make you bitter or better. Regardless of what you believe, Joseph was clear in his mind that everything that happens in this world happens because it's directed from above. And that the fact that something doesn't feel good doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't good, providing you use your life and the circumstances that come to you, not to define what greatness is, but rather how you behave and what you do with the situation in front of you. That is what describes and defines your greatness. So Joseph said to himself, for whatever reason, God wanted this to happen to me. And now I can help my brothers and my family. So clearly it was Gamza Latova, it's all for the good. But where I'm concerned, because I'm not at Joseph's level, and I doubt many of us are, now I ask myself, when something hurt me, when something happened, how can I transform this? How can I reframe this? How can I grow from this? What can I do or say or think that can turn this storm of crap into something of value. How do I do that? And I have found that if a person comes to me and asks me for forgiveness, regardless of whether I think they're doing it because they can't bear the social stigma of somebody being mad at them, regardless of whether they have genuine sense of remorse and regret, if I can find a way to improve my character, to stop drinking the poison that is killing me, if I can do that, then I end up better. And in the end, ladies, charity begins at home. You gotta look after yourself first. You need to forgive yourself first. Now, if you turn to the next page on your handout, you'll see that there are 3 levels of willingness to forgive others that are discussed in our sources. The first, some people forgive anyone who wronged them if that person comes over and asks forgiveness. No matter who they are, no matter what they did, if a person says, please forgive me, they accept the apology. It's a beautiful level, it's a high level, but there's a higher one. The second level, others go out of their way to meet those who wronged them to make it easier for the person to ask forgiveness. So I didn't understand this at first until I started thinking about things with my children, people whom I want the best possible relationships with. So when I'm upset at one of my kids, when something has happened that I feel deserves an apology or acknowledgement at least that what they did was not cool, if it's taking too long for that to happen, I would set up situations whereby they would feel softening in them that would allow them to give the apology they so rightfully needed to give. So for example, if I'd had a very, very bad day with one of my children, if they'd misbehaved terribly, they'd done things that were totally, totally wrong, as long as I stayed in the place of rage, I almost never got an apology. And they certainly never got to think about what they did wrong. But I used to do this thing, that when one of my kids and I had had an argument, and heaven knows there were many of them, especially in the teen years, I would make a dinner. I would make something that they loved. I would behave or do something for them that made them feel a sense of gratitude. And usually they would say, thanks, Ma, and then sorry about before. That was often the best I could get. Sorry about before. But you have to create the opening for people who are strong-willed, who are, what's the word I'm looking for? Who are stubborn, stiff-necked, to give them the space in order to find their inner apology to you or others. And that's why that's the higher level. Because when you love someone and you know an apology is necessary, not just for them, but for you, but for their own good. Because if a person never admits what they did was wrong, there's an idea in the Talmud that says the first time we do something wrong, it's bad, we know it's bad. We'll often create rationalizations around it if we can't apologize. The second time we do it, it's as though it's allowed to us. And by the third time, well, then it's practically a mitzvah. So you want to be the kind of person, especially as a mother, who is able to watch for openings where your children can take responsibility for that which they did that missed the mark, which means going out of your way to create a space for that to happen. The third level, people on this highest level state every night before they go to bed that they forgive anyone who insulted them, even if those people will not ask for forgiveness on their own. This, my friends, is the opening paragraph of the bedtime Shema. If you read this every night, and even if you're reading it by rote, the repetition creates neural pathways towards forgiveness. You can find it in your Siddur, or you can Google it, the opening paragraph before the bedtime Shema, but I'm going to read it to you now. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me, either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that's mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other incarnation. Any Israelite, may no man be punished on my account. May it be your will, Lord my God and God of my forefathers, that I sin no more, nor repeat my own sins, or anger you, or do what's wrong in your eyes. The sins that I've committed, erase them in your abounding mercies, not through suffering or illness. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, God, my strength and my Redeemer. Whoa. Now, years ago, I began reading that paragraph. And in the early phases, things bothered me. Because as long as you are keeping what's called a cheshbon, a bill, an accounting, as long as you are looking for a quid pro quo in life, you will find it's very difficult to do these things. And we don't live in forgiving times. But by repetition, it helped me to be able to get up in the morning with what felt like a clean slate, because it was often my rage and anger against others that stood in the way of me reaching my potential. Now, again, there is the notion of boundaries. If a person does not ask for forgiveness, if you feel that they are going to repeat the same damaging behavior to you over and over, then by all means, you need to set firm boundaries. You need to create, in my parlance, when you're going into bad weather, wear a raincoat, a psychological raincoat that prepares you for what may end up to be painful or soaking of the soul. But the interesting thing that I've discovered is that the majority of forgiveness needs to occur within families. These are not people that you can usually write off. And if you do write them off, if you do what psychologists call cut off, you should know that in cutting off a relationship, you are still in the primary fighting phase. Cut off is just the flip side of engagement in arguments. It's the silent killer. And it trains us and our children to see that the way to solve a problem is cut off, not negotiation, not compromise, not forgiveness. And that is not the way of the Jew. So forgiveness is a personal thing. It's as personal as the medicines that you require to make yourself well. But you do it for yourself. I want to read you something that I found particularly insightful by Rabbi David Wolpe. The darkness of hatred, of rage, and contempt that we harbor inside rarely injure the unforgiven as much as they do the one who will not forgive. We imagine that our continued anger is so powerful that it will bring sorrow and ruin on those against whom we hold a grudge. But its influence is far more dangerous for our own hearts. I'm going to ask you right now, while I stand here silently, to spend the next minute or two thinking about and even writing down, if you have a pencil handy, someone in your life who you can't even get to level 1 of forgiveness for. And what it might take to get to that place. Don't rehash what they did to you. Examine the feelings that you feel. Think about the consequence of the severing of that relationship. Think about the ugly feeling you have inside when you think of him or her. Do it with something that's fairly close to you. Don't have grandiose thoughts, no Hitler ideas here. And please begin now. Okay. Obviously, I don't know the particulars of anyone's situation. I don't have a clue about which boundaries you'll need to set up. I don't know where you can go with this. But I'd like to see you take one small step, even psychologically, to consider that you may not know the entire situation or circumstances of what happened, that there may be a reason that this person was taken out of your life, that in the long view, over the generations, this could create further negativity. Can you ask yourself, in the merit of your own desire and need to be forgiven, to take the first tiny step? That might not mean calling or emailing the person. It may mean replacing the thought that's always negative with something a bit more charitable, a bit more forgiving. If we are going to make steps in changing our communities and ourselves, it's best to begin with the areas that are blocked. It says in Proverbs, when your enemy falls, do not rejoice. Wow. And yet, rejoice we do. I want to finish by reading you one last quote from our Mishnah Torah. It says, it is forbidden to be obdurate. Obdurate means unforgiving, and not allow yourself to be appeased. On the contrary, one should be easily pacified and find it difficult to become angry. When asked by an offender for forgiveness, one should forgive with a sincere mind and willing spirit. Forgiveness is natural to the seed of Israel. My blessing to all of us as we take the incredible collective energy that was our 200 women, and one by one, loosen up the knots inside of our soul, beginning with a relationship close to you, to begin to reframe and rethink and loosen up the knots of anger inside of us. And as such, may we be judged favorably and lovingly this year at Rosh Hashanah ourselves by God. Perhaps you might want to consider printing out the paragraph that comes before the bedtime Shema. I think it's a tremendous place to start. And when you're filling out your surveys today, please remember, go back in your heart to that place where you sat and you felt suffused with promise that you might make this world the kind of place you would like your grandchildren to live in. Thank you so much for listening. I think we need to stop now. I'm reading on the side. Apologize doesn't mean you're right and the other person is right. It means that you value relationship more than your ego. I love that one. Apologizing doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong, or she's wrong and you're right. Sometimes it means recognizing that you value a relationship more than your ego. Absolutely true for the small things. What I'm asking you to look at now are the bigger ones, the ones that have been festering for the last year in your guts. Even if you're not prepared to do, begin by changing your mindset about that person. It says in the Torah that if we open, like the eye of a needle, a bit of return, of teshuvah, of return to our pure selves, that it will be broadened so that wagons can move through it. My blessing is that we all open that small eye of forgiveness. And thank you. If there's anyone else who would like to say something, please type it in here. Otherwise, know how much I love you, that I wish I could reach through this screen and put my hands on your faces and kiss you and be back together. And yes, I would love to come to South Africa. It's a long flight. I'm going to need some really good books. Blessings to everybody. Shall we sign off now? Erin, my love, is there anything else you would like me to add?
You got one more chat, Adrienne, from Carrie Angel.
I just want to ask, in your example about the great dinner after the argument, how does the child not then think that the behavior is okay? It's an excellent question. The answer is that as a parent, our job is to train our children to become great. How do we do that? By teaching them the skill set for which a great person holds. With children, especially stiff-necked children, and we've all got one of those, we have to create an opening, a soft place where they can permit themselves to look at themselves. Gratitude is an area that opens up the ability to do that. When a child feels that the parent's love has not been withdrawn along with the approval, because often the message that a childish mind has is that if there's no approval, that means there's no love. So when I disapprove strongly of the behavior, I always reinforce the love component of our relationship. I don't let down on the thing that I think needs to be corrected, but I up the stakes of the love. That sends the message to the child that a parent can disapprove, disagree, set boundaries, but they don't withdraw love as a punishment. it's within that space, Carrie, that I believe you have the greatest ability to teach your child the proper way to behave. Does that answer it for you to a certain extent? I'm looking. I just want to, yes. You know, parenting in the big picture does not happen on a day-to-day basis. You can say something today and tomorrow and the next day 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 and on and on and on, and you may not see any change. Remember the story I told you about the Chinese bamboo, that sometimes, 6 years of planting and watering and fertilizing, and you don't get the growth till the middle of the 6th year. But you have to understand that you are creating and developing a root system in your children that at the right time, when they flower into the kind of person you want them to be, that root system of discipline and boundaries and ideas about how one should live are already in place to support that immediate growth. Okay? I send all my love. Thank you, Jolene. I miss you too. God bless all of you. Bye-bye.